Joining us today. Hello. Thanks for joining us today for our broadcast of 6 Degrees of Smart Manufacturing. I am Conrad Leyba.
And I'm Mike Yost.
I am a director at CESMII and Mike Outreach Advisor. And we have a great guest with us today. And why are we doing this webcast? Well, we believe that we learn the best from our peers, the people that are doing the work and moving the industry forward.
Yep, exactly. Sorry to talk over you there, Conrad. So to Conrad's point, we've been doing this webcast for a couple of months now, about half a year, I guess. And the idea is to get the ecosystem together, get everybody talking with each other, or in my case, and Conrad's over each other. But we think the best way to learn is to learn with each other and from each other. And so the concept of taking 6 degrees of separation and the notion that everybody on the planet is only 6 degrees or fewer levels of connection away from knowing each other, then we ask the question, how close are we to the knowledge that we need to make smart manufacturing a reality? We think we're pretty close to it, and the best way to get after it is to get all of us together and talking with each other. So in that vein, we want to get our guest, Jim Wetzel, who's a fantastic guest for us here today to talk about what we're facing nowadays, especially as it pertains to manufacturing. And so we're going to spend the next 20 minutes in a conversation with Jim, his views on this topic. Your microphones are muted. You will not be able to ask questions throughout the webinar by using your voice. You are able to either click the question and answer box on your screen or the chat box on your Zoom platform, or submit questions by email to me and Conrad. So our emails are listed there. We will take this recording and post it online to the CESMII Smart Manufacturing Group within CESMII. We'll put that up online today, and we'll continue the dialogue, hopefully get everybody else's voices in here as well.
Yeah, we definitely want you joining the conversation at the community. And with us today, our guest, Jim Wetzel, co-founder of NxGen Group. Jim is also the former CEO at CESMII and a longtime industry leader making big impacts as Director of Engineering and Reliability at General Mills, a Fortune 500 company with a broad portfolio from flour to submarines, from toys to restaurants. Wow. So we're looking forward to our conversation today, Jim.
Yes, welcome, Jim.
And let's cue that up with the question. What does smart manufacturing look like today, especially in these times?
Well, thank you, Conrad. Thank you, Mike, for having me here today. I first want to say, thank you to all the manufacturers that are supporting all of us to remain healthy during this virus period. And so, big thanks to everyone that's doing everything they need to do in supply chain, manufacturing, healthcare, et cetera.
No doubt.
As you think about smart manufacturing, what it looks like today, I want to start with a very simple, a simple statement is I think smart manufacturing looks like help. And why do I think it looks like help is, Conrad, if you could go to the next slide. I thought about this and go, if you think over that, I've been involved with smart manufacturing over the last decade, and there are fundamental principles. And so I reviewed these this weekend as Conrad and Mike asked me to present today and have a discussion. And so I looked through my deck of material and things that I've been saying over the last decade and kind of condensed it on the left-hand side and said, well, what is smart manufacturing? What does it look like? Well, we've used these words. We've all used these words. It's the right information. It's the right technology at the right time, in the right form, to the right people. It's about connections and having all of the data connected. It's about contextualizing that data. It's about having applications use that information to solve problems and do all of that stuff in real time and have data-driven decision-making. It's about balancing the capabilities of people, process, and technology. Is that not relevant in a pandemic? you think,
So
go
yeah,
ahead.
so let's suppose maybe you can give us a concrete example, of how a company that has done something with smart, has moved forward in smart, how are they responding in contrast to a company running on spreadsheets or phone calls, you know who you are, but get me that monitor, right?
Yeah,
But
absolutely. So I think about, I'm a go and finish that right side and then give you an example. So
okay.
you think about those principles that we talked about, and then you talk about the outcomes that the business would have: end-to-end collaboration, transparency, real-time responsiveness, decentralized intelligence, improved agility. Those are all attributes that we need right now. So a few examples of companies that are early adopters of the principles and how they've applied them to the pandemic, to the crisis situation. Talk about end-to-end collaboration and transparency. The medical companies, the food companies, that's what they're doing in the spirit of trying to understand how to keep your grocery shelves full, how to keep medical materials going to hospitals and whatnot. You're seeing unprecedented spikes in demand. This concept of real-time responsiveness, guess what folks are doing? Companies like food companies, as an example, where they've made multiple flavors or different products off the same base product. Well, instead of having 10 varieties of things, maybe they can really pound out products if they have one or two varieties, and they can keep the grocery shelves full. I think you're going to see over time a rethinking of SKU rationalization across the supply chain. Does every product need to be customized? Or in some cases, is it good enough to have the mass product out there? And that's probably true for staple kinds of items, right? People aren't asking for different varieties of N95 masks. They want just an N95 mask.
Right.
So we all know that in manufacturing, we can pound it out when we have less disruption. We can pound it out when we're running more consistently, when we don't have changeovers, when we don't have those transformations. So in the short term, I think what you're seeing is organizations really hunkering down to their business. They're trying to make their lines more efficient. They're trying to understand the transparency between supply and demand, and they're trying to be super responsive and eliminate any unplanned downtime, because
That is
unplanned downtime means a case that is not being made.
a very interesting point. Before this all happened, my wife really wanted that pink mask, but right now, any color will do. So that kind of shift, is that going to stay with us? And we're going to be more like, just give me a box of stuff. I don't care what kind it is.
Time will tell, Conrad. I mean, I go to the grocery store now and no one can find toilet paper, right? So it's like, are you shopping for a particular brand or are you shopping for the item?
Yeah.
And
If we've set up, geared up for those custom orders, our system supply chain.
So this new normal, I'm not exactly sure how that's going to end up, but you think about the reason I wanted to put this slide together is in all of this chaos that we're living in. Look at this slide. These same principles are still standing true. The same business enablement is still standing true. And so we're going through a test right now. I think the concepts of smart manufacturing, the ability of smart manufacturing to make a difference is playing true.
So Jim, before we move on from this slide specifically, you touched on the point that potentially our buying behaviors may change, right? As consumers, we may be happy with less options, however that plays out over time. What do you think, as an industry, we can learn from, or behaviors that we can change? Because we've been talking about this, like you said, for decades, conceptually at a high level. There've been a lot of maybe as many operational and cultural types of barriers that are in our way, like access to data, thinking Big Brother's watching. Oh, you're going to automate me out of a job. Do you think that we'll learn as an industry that having data and having access to information is actually worth investing in?
Well, you certainly would hope so, Mike. I think what you're seeing this in the government, you know, with government's reaction to in response. You're seeing that a fair amount of the red tape and the requirements and the bureaucracy are being eliminated, so that human lives are saved.
Right.
So for all the right reasons. I think the same thing is true around keeping product in the market and keeping your business afloat, is that there are many elements of what you might normally have done that you're saying, I think I can move ahead without this policy or this procedure or this concern. And so I think, you know, the access to data, the free flowing information to vendors and suppliers and all that kind of stuff, I think what you're going to see is that uneasiness that we had when we wanted to overthink it kind of gets set along the side when you're in a crisis. And with the crisis mentality, lessons will be learned, risks will be taken, and some will pay out and some won't pay out.
Right.
And that, I think, is going to reshape people's opinions, and I think it's going to change, and different things are going to stick and be true in the future. And I think the crisis will show us clearly which one of those things are absolutely needed as protection or policy, and which ones are not. Kind of this want versus need kind of concept.
You know, Jim, you recently engaged in a pilot with the manufacturers for the CESMII extended services, and I think you came out with some insights about disruption. Do you want to talk to us about disruption?
Yeah. So if you go to the next slide. So CESMII reached out, and we were going to talk about this at the annual members meeting. And reached out and said, you know, how can we add more services? How can we add more capabilities to our members to assist them in their smart manufacturing journey? And one of the things we did is, first of all, during that time, I said, how can I help? And so I formed a company called NxGen Group, and I have two associates, Doug Kaywood and Doug Berger. And what we did, the first thing we did was try to understand the smart manufacturing maturity of an organization. So with prior work that was done, and then with evolution of this assessment tool that was done, a smart manufacturing maturity assessment was created. And what was unique about that is, in that assessment, it talks about the gaps to the goals of your organization. It talks about the 6 dimensions of smart manufacturing and what capability you have in that and what gaps you might have. And the most important thing that's turned out that we had done was talk about disruption. And when we gave this survey the first couple times, you're talking to manufacturing organizations about disruption, and they're really puzzled with why we're asking questions about disruption. And this is in January. This is in December and January. The virus is just starting to flow, and no one really kind of knows what it's going to be. You know, no one predicted it's going to be like this, evidently. And the eyebrows go up about, what's this disruption thing? Well, if you take a look at it, the military has created this term called VUCA, which stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And people are talking about the new normal, and I hate the word new normal, but I'd really more talk about, as we go into this disruptive environment where things are uncertain and you just don't know how it's going to turn out, what do you rely on? You rely on things that you know, because things that you don't know are disruptive. And you start looking around to see if you can kind of piece together to kind of figure out your way forward. And I would suggest to you that when we follow this survey and we looked at disruptive, that most companies are ill prepared for disruption. Okay. Most of the elements that they're working on is they might know of a disruption, but they're not really necessarily acting on it. So we can see that future, and you can even see that future now in organizations across the globe. It's not evenly distributed, right? We have manufacturers that are record-setting production performance right now. We have other manufacturers that are sitting idle. And so as you're faced with this kind of chasm of disruption, what are you going to do about it? And I'd suggest kind of the following. Start thinking about your enterprise as a whole system, not as a line, not as a unit, but as a whole system. Supply chain, including your external side of the supply chain, your internal supply chain, and then your customer. I think emerging from this, we talked briefly about SKU rationalization. I think real briefly, new paradigms and business models are going to come out of this thing. How you went into it is probably not how you're going to come out of it or how you're going to restart. This concept of digital transformation that was a kind of a nice buzzword to be used, a month ago, it's becoming more and more true, right? You can't work from home unless you're digital. You can't share data and be transparent end to end. You can't communicate with suppliers. I mean, digital is becoming the way we work, and the pandemic has shown that it is critical for this. And when we go in and go out of this thing, we're going to see we have different workers, right? So you've got 10 million people unemployed right now. Are they going to go back to their same jobs? Is this an opportunity to train them differently and come back into better jobs or different jobs? Are they going to ask for digital communications and understanding in real time what's going on in the manufacturing site? So, there's a lot of question marks that the pandemic has thrown in, that just in general disruption has thrown in. And when we were on this journey for smart manufacturing, we were kind of going at our own pace. The pace just got changed by an external factor, and that ramp up of pace is really critical. And you're seeing, right, different organizations respond. You're seeing the government throwing funding into topics. You're seeing a lot more energy being thrown into this, and this is a time where you can't stay silent.
Right. Well, speaking of pace, the pace of this conversation is quick, but we're running out of time here. Unfortunately, I did want to just make sure we stay with the thread quickly, to the point that you just mentioned, Jim, that there's a specific program that NIST has opened up to put the institutes, the Manufacturing USA Institutes, on point to essentially look at any opportunities, any ideas for funding with some of those historical processes and strings, as you talked about, Jim, out of the way, so that we can more actively either immediately respond to the crisis or help us accelerate from a long-term perspective. And so that's absolutely an example of what you're talking about. As you were talking also, I guess maybe a couple of points or a couple of things that we could jump into right now. You talked about the pilot that we've started, obviously from CESMII. We want to continue that, moving that forward, but also we're behind NxGen in a webcast series that you want to start to hold, and we're going to help facilitate that, promote that, and get people engaged in that dialogue. Could you explain that for just a minute?
Yeah, so as I'm sitting here retired or somewhat retired, I went, how can I help? And I know a lot of you folks, and so I said, well, how about if I can connect with you all and put on a webinar, 30 minutes, where we talk, give critical insights from America's thought leaders in manufacturing that gets you through the pandemic, sharing your best practices and examples, leveraging this community. And so our first one is actually going to be next week, April 15th at 4 p.m. Eastern time. We'll get all the information to you. But it's for practitioners in manufacturing to share their problems, share their solution, and talk about things. I maybe want to close. I see we're really getting close on time, but I want to close on a couple things. They say you learn all your lessons in kindergarten. For life. Well, I learned some lessons past kindergarten when I was a Boy Scout leader. In my Boy Scout time, one of the things I learned was that if you want to get resolution to things, you need to share your problems. You don't want to take all the burden on yourself. If you share your problems, you'll find people coming out of the woodwork to provide help. Mm-hmm. Smart manufacturing looks like help. You need to leverage the community that you're part of. The webinar series will be an opportunity to, share practices. These webinars, these 6-degree webinars, are opportunities to share practices, share principles. I would suggest share your problems, leverage the community that you're part of, and fabulous things will come out of this.
Appreciate that very much, Jim. Appreciate the time here, and agree with you completely. And that's our call for every one of these webcasts has been to engage with us, do exactly what Jim's just talking about. We are going to take this recording, and within a few hours, we will post it online. We will put it into our online LinkedIn group community, and we would encourage everybody who's online to start to share the way Jim just articulated and see if we can find answers to questions and problems that people have.
Yeah, and stay tuned to this same BAT channel, and we will have exciting things coming up starting with April 22nd. We will share more details about these events coming up, but we will have exciting guests coming up and some surprises. So please stay tuned and join us and join that conversation online, please.
Yes, and you can find us on YouTube, on Twitter, at our website, and then also by email here. So again, thank you, Conrad. Thank you, Jim. Really appreciate it. Everybody have a wonderful day.
Bye.